Well, it looks like we are running. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 24th of August in our crappy, what the hell is going on year. And of course, remember all the exciting, wonderful material of tortugas.com, which admittedly is older, but has an awful lot, which no problem at all. So let me wait until I can get my camera alive. Come on, there's my woo. It's a nice, cool 82 now at the moment. It's been pushing around 100 degrees. It's been a broil last few days, and it's been rather icky even at night. There's sometimes not enough breeze, sometimes a breeze, but smoke coming in from the various fires that are still circulating around in the area. So anyway, now at the moment, kind of comfy. So comparatively speaking, as we know, here's our looking around for my props. Our cute little bits. Evolution, the fossils still say no. And evolution, the fossils say no. From 1978 and 1995. These were, back in the day, super duper go-to items for any well-informed creationist. Put that in air quotes. Today, they're much less widely known, but it occurs to me that in our tradition of plowing through anti-evolution works and collating just how source usage is done, nothing quite like going through them one by one. And future ones we might want to pay attention to will be Steve Meyer's 2 books, and also even Michael Denton's thing, because he did a Evolution, a Theory in Crisis in 1985, and then in 2016 did a retool, of which quite a big chunk of it I was paying attention to for Evolution Slam Dunk up there. And both Meyer and Denton actually have better reference bibliographies and things like that, but still a matter of figuring out exactly what they're citing and all that between one volume and the next, and see how they're used could actually be kind of useful. So that's a possibility of having them on the queue somewhere down the road once we get past our little Gish books, unless somebody else has some things to offer. So we'll see how that goes. Stuff that's would be merely comic relief would be like some of the idiot creationist books, Dr. Noah Thing or Two, which were a bunch of little kids' books done from like 1990s or so. Those are kind of sloppy game. Anyway, on with what we're dealing with here. So Gish is, hello, Lisa. Gish is dealing with the issue of how far back do microorganisms go in the paleontological record. And he wants to cast as much doubt about this as possible. He certainly doesn't want there to be a trajectory where there is bacterial life in the dim and distant past, and then way down the road, we get more complex life. It's all got to be simultaneous in the young Earth creation. He has to kind of whiff around it very delicately. And for this, he had a lot of stuff. There'll be later on, I'm actually going to be jumping back into the beginning of the 95 book, because he dribbles a bunch of creationist material in the beginning of that chapter that came after the 78 book. And I think in part, it's kind of padding on his part, because it's been a very sparse option. He's only added like another couple of technical papers in this little segment that we'll be dealing with today. And so he's running like about a dozen papers, all told, as opposed to nearly half of the book, which is creationist material. And so I'm almost getting the feeling that he's constantly upgrading the amount of creationist material he's lathering into it to keep the weight pressed down on the side of creationism. But we'll be able to find that about 1 billion years after the Earth formed, didn't they? Yeah. Well, yeah, the Luca and all of that we're talking about quite early in the game, a couple billion years ago. cyanobacteria that proved to be extremely relevant. They're 2.5 billion years ago, something like that. There's all of these going on from there down to snow, that sort of thing. That, from a genetic point of view, is really the whole game, because the superstructure that's going to lead to all this multicellularity stuff later on has been developing in this seething mass of the invisibles, because bacteria and their like, even when you can sure there were bacteria, what bacteria, what genomes? There's no way of preserving any of that. Even if you had the most spectacular Lagerstätten on the planet, you're not going to get that. You're only going to get the little shape of something. Anyway, back in the 60s, which is the material that Gish is trawling off of, the oldest of which, or the closest to his publication date in 78, is almost a decade. It's like 1967, over a decade. Walter Bradley's 68, just a decade. So he's not exactly keeping up to speed in the 78 book. And because he's functionally repeated all of this material in the 95 book, oh boy, is it out of kilter. Anyway, he cites a bunch of these papers to suggest that identifying early microorganisms wouldn't be easy. There's a lot of difficulties, a lot of dispute about trying to figure out what's a mineral accretions and what's actually is the sign of an organism. All fair enough, perfectly legitimate. And the scientists in question, as we'll be seeing, are completely mindful of all of this stuff. They know full well what's going on this matter. But the selectivity with which he's presenting these things is telling us things too. So the first one off the mark, unfortunately, I'll be able to bring up, in most cases, full text of stuff. There's a few things where I may only have the abstract, and there are some papers that I couldn't find the background for, but they're not too big of a problem, because technically speaking, Gish isn't citing those. He's only talking about these papers that are talking about a previous paper. So it's a little trickier on that. Anyway, one was by Walter Bradley from 1968. And this turned out to be not the same Walter Bradley as the one who is the anti-evolutionist that's kind of hovering around the intelligent design. They're both named Walter, but one's an H and one's an L for the middle name. So it turned out not to be the same person. This one's a geologist. And this was, in fact, a bit retracting his own paper from about 65 or so earlier, which Gish didn't cite. That identifies, that tried to identify unfossilized Precambrian bacteria. That's quite a haul right in there. You'll be able to see the references and stuff to it, because again, we'll have the link up to it, so you can take a look at it. So there we have a peripheral detail. It's a fraction of a prior work that was problematic by the author's own admission. Got it. Next one is another critical piece from Bramlett. Now, I should point out, I suppose I could just take the booklet here. The 78 version will give a sense about what this is. All we're looking at 7. It's bare bone. There's no indication of what the titles are, no indication about their context. Now, to some extent, the scientific literature in the typical technical paper has sparse footnotes in that form too, but they're explaining context and Gish isn't. Gish is using it, a paving element, or in the case of this Engel paper, we'll be getting to in a bit, for an authority quote. And it's a revealing authority. So we've got just a thing here on my little screen I'm looking at. So this Bramlett bit, to allude to another paper that indicating a legitimate finding of very old microbacteria. This was a thing relating to the Gunflint Church, which is why we're going to be having the title of this particular show. And then Hamlet was talking about another issue, which certain geological details could, and he wanted to caution people, but he wasn't specifically taking on want to put anything in the Gunflint Church or any church or anything else. Now, it turns out that Bramlett, I had to look up a little bit about him because I didn't know diddly squat about him. And he was born in 1896 and died in 1977. So this was in the tail end of his career. He was a respected scientist, and there's a very nice homage on his work that I'll be putting a link up to so that you can get a pretty good sense about where he's coming from on this. The Gunflint Church issue, Gunflint Church, boy, that's a tough one for me to say tonight. It doesn't appear anywhere in the indexes of either one of Gish's book. That's the context of this stuff that we're getting here. And the same, we'll be discovering the same thing with another geologic thing that he'll be citing in this angle paper. And so Gish is not going out of his way to provide context for anything. He presumably thought that these doubts were sufficient, but bringing up the Gunflint was not a good idea, because one of the other papers that he's dealing with is Preston Cloud 1965. Why he thought to even allude to this one at all, I couldn't get the technical content of the thing, although it's not a huge paper, but still, it's about the Gunflint Church. And hello, scientific origins. But there's all we need to do is to jump forward in time. So there's a paper from 2022 by Sasaki, which is all about the Gunflint Church and all the little bits relating to all of this stuff. And it's not the full paper, but boy, it's an extended segment. That'll give you the main point is Gunflint Church microorganisms are to this day regarded as real. And the various papers discovering these things, including that one that was alluded to by Bramlett in his little short piece, there's been no doubt that those are legitimate things. So the fact that Gish is trying to cast doubt at arm's length about organisms and details, the details of which he doesn't get within a mile of, citing zero technical papers that are directly related to it, is a feeling of how he plays. I knew this already with SORS and the reptile mammal transition and everything else. It's a hallmark of Gish's style. I described it in the old tip work as a detail fiddler, and Casey Luskin is a detail fiddler. The late Icons of Evolution guy, also a detail. He on Jonathan Webb being the Duane Gish of intelligent design if Luskin hadn't got there first, because amazingly enough, Luskin is so prolific that roughly 14-15% of the entire intelligent design literature in my reference field is just Luskin. So he is verbose, and since he's come back into the fold and works there in intelligent design and kind of is the closest they can get to like a paleontologist, now that Beckley wrapped himself around a car in what sounds like a very bad suicide attempt. Sad circumstance. I'm assuming trouble things were going on in his head and all of that. I don't know what his family would be thinking about the troubles of it. But better hope he doesn't run into me in a dark alley after that stunt he pulled with that graph from me. Yeah. Oh, yes. For those who are not aware, let me put that. That's an allusion to and Erica got it given on Luskin in this thing because it's an absent. There we go. Oh, this one, the Laetoli footprints are still footprints. Yeah, I don't think they're disputing that. The major argument, and Erica has spotted the same point, creationists bend over backwards to say they're just people prints. And they just kind of don't pay close attention to how that, not thumb, but the big toe, extends out I think there's a term for it, flexion or some such thing, because she would know all that. But anyway, that little big toe sticks out rather more, not as much as a chimpanzee, but rather more than our foot tends to do. So there's really very little justification for the argument that any anatomically modern human being could have made them, but they are a bipedal print. And depending on how close they want to fiddly bit with the details and that, you get these just extended daisy chains, both on the intelligent design side and young earth creationism. That when it comes to human evolution, there's very little difference in the apologetics between the two. Oddly, the group that tends to shy away from a lot of this stuff historically is the old earth creationists, basically Fazal Rana and Hugh Ross. Their position is kind of restricted to Neanderthals not being humans. They're kind of bucking the trend in creationism, which lumps them together. And of course, you still have some that are pushing the Neanderthals as just a variant branch of the human species. Jerry Coyne seems to be flirting with it again from a recent paper and all that. So it's you have to leave out an awful lot of data to arrive at that, though. And we have enough DNA that the geneticists aren't buying it. So it's a very peculiar position for Coyne to take in perhaps a string of peculiar positions that he has taken more recently than in other ways. Anyhow, back to our little walk down memory lane there. So the Sasaki paper will put you up to speed on a lot of the material discussing how these things are done. There's been quite a few papers on the Gunflint chert. There was one from PNAS that was somewhat older, from like 2013 or so, that I almost decided to put a link up on, but it'll be okay. This one I think should give you a basic idea. So the Engel paper, also 1968, so a decade old, that one is another technical paper. Cloud, 1965, and Engel are the only two new technical papers in there. So we're only running up to like about a dozen technical citations in the book so far. And it is on the Unverwacht series, which Gish is just authority quoting a little snippet from it, where they were expressing how much caution they felt about whether or not you identify material as microorganisms or not. There's a little ... in the middle there too. Well, we know from downstream, like the Gunflint chert, there is no doubt that these things are Precambrian microorganisms. So it's fair to say Gish can't be held accountable for analyses that are done way after, even after he was dead. But it is a useful measure to indicate that, holy smokes, Gish track record for nuance and accuracy ain't high. The science moved on, and Gish, in his worldview, were drawing little lines in the sand that were irrelevant to the points at issue. So then our other half bit is the Luskin papers. Let me make a little brief pause here and put our thank you to people who are still sticking with the old RJ via the wonderful world of Patreon, as economic conditions are getting ickier and ickier and ickier for people. Not so for the moneybags oligarchs slavering over the race cars, slipping around Washington, D.C. Today, which Mr. and Mrs. Emperor were having a bit of a tiff or something going on. It's very, very. I'll be intrigued to see as well what kind of that little operation went in. Anyway, thank you very much, all the patrons to the project over the years. We will keep at it jolly well as long as we can. So, these stupid little menus come out. Come on. Oh, trying to close that down. There we go. Looking at my little files, flitting around. So, the Luskin list, there's 3 more papers on the list. This is still all in the big ALU sign pile Most of those papers will be in that. It's a really long wad, and then there's a relatively smaller cluster of things under additional categories that we'll be getting to. And we've already stumbled into some of the categories because I was occasionally following up on the same author or same topic that's getting listed over, and there were even 1 or 2 cases of double dipping where they were listing the same paper twice, but that's, there we go. Anyway, these are all 2013, which means we're now 13 years old. We've been seeing papers from the 2020s. That's given us a measure of where the land lays on how much of the junk DNA is actually not junk. And so for all practical purposes, nothing that we could be acquiring in papers that old are going to change what we already have as the viewpoint currently. But we can see again the tiptoeing around data field. The first one is this paper by Hajigaru and Delihas, which is a rare example of them putting a comment in their bibliography. So far, everything has just been technical source, no annotations, nothing whatsoever. And suddenly, bingo, there's this little comment: a single point mutation in a sign ALU sequence in a human long non-coding RNA leads to brainstem atrophy and death. First, this is not a direct quote from the paper. It is a summary of a thing in the paper, and it's the wording change that intrigued me, because the word atrophy never comes up in the paper, and they're changing the word around shows you how they're going to be tiptoeing away from the data field. But we're obviously slamming into the theodicy issue as well, because this is a mutation that can cause atrophy and death. Now, you can quibble perhaps that if the ALUs that are involved in this kind of a thing are being normally happy campers, but that a nasty mutation, maybe from Satan, has caused a terrible thing to happen, and that causes a problem. Not the designer's fault per se, unless you're an omnipotent designer that knows full well what the ranges are and has built supposedly fantastically complicated compensatory mechanisms in this kludgy way that just mimics evolution. Isn't this defect, this terrible thing to happen with just a single mutation, sloppy design? It's like having razor sharp things on play toys for the kids. Is that a good idea? That issue doesn't go away and because of this. But what's more interesting is where this particular point came up in this paper, because it was referring to another paper, Cartalt et al. 2012, that is from PNAS, and I'll be putting the link up to that so everyone can follow it. It was already in my reference bibliography because I have been following the disease side of ALUs for quite a few years. So whenever I would be seeing anything in PNAS, Science, or Nature, or any other technical area that stumbles into this, I'm adding it into my theodicy ALU pile. So this was already in there. And the Cartalt paper is not on the Luskin list. So whatever it is, they decided this thing wasn't relevant to their little case, and so they're leaving it out. So let's look a little closer. As I noted, the sentence that's in the Luskin list is not a direct quote. It's obviously a comment. But the use of the word human long non-coding RNA is where they're getting sneaky, because the paper is about this feature that is a primate-specific occurrence, not just human beings. All the primates have this ALU circumstance, and therefore this is a risk that we've just inherited from that. As we've noticed in previous cases where the technical papers have directly discussed how the ALU retrotransposon originated and how it's been mutated into varying little families and subfamilies and groups that get carried along in various lineages, about which I have never seen Luskin or anybody else at the Discovery Institute pay the slightest attention. If anybody has an exception to that, please let me know, because I don't. In the old days, I was on their little mailing list. Apparently, they went through with a fine-tooth comb some years back and probably knocked me off because I was not a fellow traveler. And so I only occasionally bump into the Discovery Institute when people are talking about it or it's alluded to in topics that we're dealing with. So if there is an example somewhere of where Casey Luskin or anybody else at the DI has taken on in any substantive way ALU retrotransposons, please let me know in the comment section when the video gets posted. I would be delighted to know, but I'm not holding my breath that they've ever done that. When he was alive, Jonathan Wells wasn't doing that either. Just a brief little allusion to a little tiny edge of it, including the BLU version that's found in rats. And other than that, nothing. So under the issue that one of the things that distinguishes anti-evolutionists is they're missing most of the data field, this is another example. ALU retrotransposons, the reptile-mammal transition, cognitive literature. These are all areas that are functionally invisible in the anti-evolution canon, both young Earth creationist and non, to where these are smoking guns, pay attention to them. Naturally, if you want the killer reptile-mammal transition issue, evolution slam dunk, and we allude to other matters, ALUs pop up in all that, and rocks were there, and again in elements otherwise, but it's my go-to because it's 10% of our genome. And the failure to figure out how much of that supposedly is relevant and operational is a disaster for their ideological position that they're not really comfortable with the idea that a designer has so much kludgy junk stuff knocking around. And even though theoretically they seem okay with it, just as theoretically intelligent design is okay with alien designers if they're not specifying one from the Bible, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. In fact, that's exactly what they're saying. And somebody like Dembski would be quite clear about it. Oh, I see it. Windows update again. No. Otherwise, the bloody thing is going to be chomping off in 4 minutes. I wish things would be a little bit better. Give them a couple hours and let it go. Pardon, I have to check a stupid Windows update. It immediately wants me to set a time for the update thing to happen. And since I don't want to shut down automatically here, now I'm waiting for its little spinny wheel to get around so that I can get a clock up. Good Lord. Come. We apologize. I would start singing dulcet tones here. Pick a time at, yeah. Good Lord, where is the... Why am I not being able to see what we got? Okay. Let's give that, there we go, 5:30. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, that'll work. That's, what time is it? 12:50? Yeah, we can do that. We can do 3:30 a.m. I'm assuming we are thinking it's currently, okay. And now that's there. Okay, we will assume our thing. All right, I guess it's settled for 3:30 a.m. and hopefully that will not interrupt our bloody show. Pardon for the delay. So, you'll have the Cartal paper that you can look at, which is going into the fiddly bit details about how this mutation and serious stuff is going on, and the fact that we know that Luskin isn't paying attention to it. Now, we got 2 more papers. The next one, Sosa et al. We're putting a full link up on that one. And it also is discussing ALU factors for the entire primate side, not just human beings. But not only that, they're not talking about ALU specifically. They're talking about a biological system that in the primates and humans, ALUs have come to have an invigolement part. But in fact, the system they're talking about is broadly ranged and goes all the way back to archaea. So the biological context of this is yet again more panorama that the younger, if the intelligent designers are just paying no attention to. Why do they keep on bringing these wonderful papers up that are not helping their case? I don't know. It's absolutely hilarious. That book says a man can get a wife by grasping a German virgin. The spinning wheel of death. That sounds eccentric. They got the Song of Solomon too. Boy, how many Bible believers want that in the schools? Much. Anyway, and then the other paper, Sternewiler et al., it's on alternative splicing, which again, ALUs have come to affect because ALUs are really promiscuous. They connect up with things quite easily. So it's understandable, as we've seen in the previous papers that we've been discussing, that the biology has found ways to latch on to and or compensate for. In some cases, many of the papers would be calling attention to the fact that ALUs have to be kind of dampened down. Otherwise, you're in a whirl of hurt, precisely because they can gum everything up. And an organism that can't do that is going to be dead. So all of that background detail of all you'd have to do if you bump into Casey Luskin or any one of his ilk is ask, how many designers were there? Did they design any ALUs? When and how many? And fill in the details. Tell us. There's only 1.4 million of them for you to play around with. It could be a snap. Wow. I mean, it's like trying to do a detailed systematic taxonomy of all of the arthropods. Yeah, it's only a few millions. Yeah, that's no problem at all. Don't hold your breath that any of them are ever going to do that. Meanwhile, the science literature continues on. The spinning wheel of death. Funny how, oh, yes, evangelical Christians voted for a convicted rapist. Yeah, the issue is they just don't think about things they don't think about. Remember, one of the essences of the whole TortucanWordPress.com argument about the cognitive, it's the methodology, Troubles in Paradise, the methodology of creationism. That's what the whole project's about. It's measuring what the source analysis feel, how they make and use sources, how they deal with source material from quotations to technical literature, is revealing how their mind works, and more importantly, how their mind doesn't think about things they don't think about. And that they can be brilliant, they can be accomplished, or they can be numbskulls like Kent Hovind, and nonetheless, they have a unifying feature. A Philip Johnson, who got into Harvard when he was 16, and a Kent Hovind, who is the Donald Trump of creationism, methodologically shake out the same bag because they're all perfectly capable of apologetically relying on the little teeny bits that they want to rely on to arrive at the conclusion that's non-negotiable, and nothing can dislodge them from it. We're seeing this to some extent, Duffy and his interactions with Erica, where he's constantly, he's just incrementally moving microns, but not really giving fundamental inches. And his brain, he frequently will admit, I just have trouble understanding this. I can't get my head around systematics. I can't get around the idea about clades and human beings being fish and or eukaryotes and or animals. And so those kinds of conceptual flaws are not unique to Will Duffy. They're universal. Anti-evolutionists have a terrible problem with this kind of stuff. There are no exceptions. If they could wrap their head around it, they would be an evolutionist because the data is so severe. So they have to have a thing where they're just looking at the parts that they need to look at to give them like little cuddle blankets. Rebecca, who is a young Earth creationist who had Dan Stern Cardinale and other people on to explain things to her. Nonetheless, her brain just kind of goes into deer in the headlight mode at specific moments. You can often see if Dan Stern Cardinale talking with some creationists like Rob Carter and others, there's a moment when the eyeballs are kind of veering and they're really not paying close attention. That's the Tortucan mind at work. It's just bouncing off the mind shell. And it explains why, as a historical enterprise, it's very rare to find a committed, intellectually solid anti-evolutionist who ever changes their mind on it. And if they were non-Tortucans raised in an anti-evolution environment, tons of ex-creationists out there, that's a different kettle of fish. But somebody that has a natural Tortucan mind is relatively impenetrable. And so you get a tiny number of people who have flipped positions on this. And sometimes they're still showing Tortucan traits. The late Glenn Morton is an example of an ex-young Earth creationist who was also a climate science denier. And then move over even farther, Ian Plimer, anti-creationist, never a creationist, down in Australia. He also is a climate science denier and wrote an absolutely dreckish book that we'll be alluding to when Jackson and I are do the thing on conspiracy thinking and climate science denial and all that, because it's just as much an illustration of the muck that can go on in a Tortucan mind, even when they would seem to be on a position that would be agreeing with some of our stuff. So one bad method to rule them all, kids. That's the structure of it. So anyway, so you'll have all those little papers to play around in. I'm still in the tailspin development of scrunching down the text that Verbose Me has done. Plus, some brand new papers have come along. There's just been some really brand new material on origin of life research and the little red dots that are turning out to be black hole stars early in the universe and all this stuff. There's this cutting edge field, and there's new papers on the subject. And so we're folding all of that into the mix, and occasional blips, the social context of things. I mean, when we started out this project, this is while we're still in the Biden administration. And we moved from the stage where Kash Patel is a screwball at the periphery of the internet, screaming about all sorts of culture camp issues, to him becoming head of the FBI under Donald Trump. So la-di-da, what a movement that we've worked into. I would contend that there has never been so heavily Tortucan a bunch in government as populates the Trump administration, where you did have some reasonably competent people in previous Republican administrations, including Reagan and Bush, even Bush too. But holy smokes, it's crazy train time with the Trump administration. And I hold every single senator and J.D. Vance, vice president, who after all was the deciding vote for Hegseth, responsible for this mess. And history and we voters and people who want to live in a world that's better than the crap that's been making for us for the last quarter of a century, have jolly well better learn the lesson and hold these people to account to where their political careers are over after this is over. Plus, we need to demolish all of the crap that Trump has been doing in Washington, D.C. I would prefer to dump all of the debris on his front yard, and we can throw in some for Chief Justice Roberts, who suddenly gave the go-ahead for that idiot ballroom. It's pathetic, absolutely. The reptoids must have taken over their minds. If it were only so easy. There was a humorous science fiction series that was on CBS, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer now. But anyway, about these alien bugs that were invading Earth, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and they were basically taking over people's minds and turning them into compliant things. And so the idea that a lot of the insanity that was going on, including Republicans, was all due to the alien bug brains that were controlling them. And it was a dry, satirical thing that had very good cast and very charming. But no, it's something much more fundamental than that. It's that Tortucan minds are obsessed with a thing they want to be true. And how much of that dominates their cognitive landscape depends on the thing they want to be true and how it connects up to larger things. It can be just a little teeny hobby horse where they're perfectly normal in every way, but they think somebody other than Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare's plays. Or they can be a broader range. When you get down to creationism, it's a monstrous culture camp ideology that bumps into attitudes about homosexuality and transgender and economic policies, and in addition to sauropod vertebrae. And that network that's been percolating and basically took over the Republican Party. Remember, the Speaker of the House is a Ken Ham-style creationist. I wish reporters would be asking him. I'd love to know more details about what goes on in that little noggin of his, but don't expect that until we get more reporters who are in a position to be able to ask source methods questions. And we should be asking source methods questions of our candidates at all times, because we have to practice sound method as voters, and we need to hold all candidates to sound method, because otherwise, vote in Tortukans and it's a shithole. And we are seeing just exactly how disastrous it is when 77 million American voters thought Donald Trump was a good idea for round two. No, 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 no. Serious problems. So let me put our little advert up. Yep, 39 minutes, not too bad. We've got Oxford there, volume 2 at Vert for volume 1. Let me get my cue up my thing. Whew, now we're up to, yeah, we're still at 82. I'm just getting sweaty from, I jibber jabber a lot. And there we go. And away we go. And although it still ultimately is a CreateSpace product, I hear that university somewhere around there. I would love to have our books done through a proper channel, especially with illustrations. Still would like to do a illustrated version of Evolution Slam Dunk. Christine Janis said that all it needed was proper illustrations and it'd be college level. I'm sure it would need some editing in that because I do tend to be verbose and somewhat polemical. But I'm okay with that, getting that trimmed down. Bannon's shaking in his boots. Yes. Oh, Steve Miller. There's a whole bunch of them that are going to be facing all sorts of disastrous things. Bannon is almost, he's still an evil force lurking around on the pimple back ass of Trumplandia, but there's going to be things on environmental screw ups that are being done from the little bear place where they're building the roads down there for the ice people to run around for no apparent reason. There'll be a massive number of hearings that will need to be told to look into all the graft and sweetheart deal contracts and the like that will have wasted a colossal amount of money in this area. And of course, thanks to Trump, the vast majority of our national debt has been added under the two Trump administrations, and we're now up to $40 trillion. And no sign in sight that any of that's going to change because the Republican Party, Trumpistas, are absolutely committed never, under any circumstance, ever raise taxes on rich people. No. No matter how much money, no matter what a high proportion they hold of the country, even though that's a thing that's dangerous for market capitalism and free enterprise, never make them pay like 42% the way we had under Clinton when we had budget surpluses. It's crazy. And I'm afraid things are probably going to have to get much worse for more people to go, what? And start getting off their duff. And young people, kids, you're going to be living in this future, this thing that's being made by these nincompoops. I am not a part of that iniquity because I didn't vote for these people. I vote for intelligent senators and intelligent representatives and intelligent presidents. And I have not voted for any of these clowns. So other people may have a responsibility here. I do not. But that doesn't mean that I shut my brain down and that I can't deal with what's trying to do on the things to make sure that as we slide down the razor blade of iniquity that the Trumpistas are doing for us, that Washington State and where we are here has as little damage with us as possible. We'll see how things go. Anyway, welcome to the 21st century, kids. Isn't that exciting? So anyway, Everybody stay super duper safe. There's floods, there's heat waves, there's mess plus ice plus terraforms plus in Europe horrifying heat waves. Yes, voted. I did for the same thing because don't blame me. I voted for Harris. And one of these days we may live to the point where we can actually see a woman president, and that misogynists who seem to have a problem with that, apparently they're not very Star Trek, because women captains and admirals are a thing normally in that world, and that's the world that I inhabit, one where talent matters, not what your genitalia are. But Tortugan minds have a problem with all that. Yeah, Citizens United would probably, because of the stupid Supreme Court, it would probably require a constitutional amendment, because otherwise you're just bucking up against the Supreme Court. So there's a bunch of things in the same way that adjustments to the Second Amendment and things have to be done by amendment. Adjustment to eliminate the Electoral College, or although I think Congress can be expanded just by legislation, we need to do that too. There's a whole bunch of reforms we need to do, and hopefully the bad times ahead will whack us upside the head and give us an impetus to be able to do some things that need to be done that should have been done decades ago. We're way overdue for some progressive reforms, and I want the United States to continue to be a force for progress and prosperity. And so long as these nincompoops are in charge of it, we're not going to get either one of those. And I find that annoying. 21st century is far too exciting, and the technologies that we have available are far too wonderful to let these nincompoops screw it up for us, especially young people who are going to have to live in this world. So, yes, you're just in time to see me sign off, Purple. You can catch it from the beginning there. So anyway, everybody stay super duper safe. Keep your financial powder dry. Bear in mind that we're skating on thin ice in a lot of areas. You've got presumably tens of thousands of companies that are just barely avoiding raising prices because they've been trying to stave off antagonizing their business base because of the tariffs. Millions of Americans have been belt tightening and charging up their credit cards and all that with that same problem in mind. What happens when all those lines cross? And when the bottom end of that K oligarch prosperity starts suffering as well, we will be seeing what will be happening. And the question is, will that shit be happening before the midterms? And where will we be going on that? So anyway, everybody stay safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins wielding lasers and guarding the ice wall. And we will be seeing you next week with a non-Luskin week. And then another Luskin one after that, where we will be continuing to find out they don't have a leg to stand on. Au revoir.